Hi, everybody. Welcome to Masters of Mash. My name is Pimpdaddysupreme. As you may or may not know, this show is a deep dive into mashup music and culture, specifically focused on the producers who helped make this a worldwide phenomenon for just about 20 years now. For those of you who have seen the show again, you might be aware of some of the things that make up mashup culture, some of the key historical moments that really solidified this. One being the manifesto put out by Boom Selection back in the day called Nevermind the Bootlegs Volume 1, which was a 3-disc data set or data disc set of mashups and tracks that would inspire the movement. Basically, it was everything from people like Freelance Hellraiser and Too Many DJs, but also tracks by Aphex Twin and stuff like that. Really solidifying that this movement was much more than just an A plus B variation of mashing things up, that it took inspiration other places. Today's guest is one of those inspirations, being track 2 on disc 2. Was it stAllio, aka or stAllio the original Wanksta, aka Stallion Gangsta or Stally Gangsta? I don't know. He made a portmanteau at one point of that, and then eventually wound up with stAllio with the exclamation point, which you see right below here. Although, because I'm doing all caps, usually it's ST in lowercase, capital A, and then lowercase LLIO, exclamation point. His super group, Animals Within Animals, had that track on that disc with a song called Hello, which was a supercut, if you will, of famous songs using the word hello, put together into a beat and making a humorous, sound collage track out of that. We're going to talk with him today about his start, his influences, his work, and what he's doing now. Without further ado, here is stAllio. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
You are live on Masters of Mash. You seem so excited. So let's just jump right into this. When and where were you born?
I was born in Indianapolis in August of 1976.
Okay. And you grew up in that region, went to school in that region, stuff like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So your early days coming up in Indianapolis, was there any kind of like overarching like musical thing that happened culturally or locally that you were aware of as a child?
Locally, not so much. Culturally, I don't know. MTV was obviously a big thing. That was where I discovered Weird Al, which started me on the humorous music tip.
Now, you have a sister. ZZ Top.
Showing you my ZZ Top record. That's totally related.
Wait, did Weird Al do something with? There you go. That's fantastic.
No.
Well, hold on to that because I want to talk to you about.
Excuse myself from the screen.
Your parents.
So show you my props.
Your parents weren't big music listeners, or what did they wind up listening to?
They were, but they weren't like huge on contemporary music. Like they would sing in the church choir. We would hear whatever top 40 or radio would be in the background and stuff. My father was more into like jazz and classical.
So all your pop music came through like MTV, I'm assuming a radio?
MTV and radio for the most part, yeah.
And so when you were like listening to radio, were you doing any like recordings off of radio? Was that the rite of passage at that time?
A little bit, yeah. little bit. I would record the soundtrack off of like a movie. So I had like my homemade version of like the Muppet movie soundtrack, home taped
That's awesome.
right off the movie.
So it was what how old were you? That was in 84. You said you were born in 76?
Yeah.
So you would have been like what, like 8 years old when Weird Al Yankovic's what album was that again?
It was the in 3D, which was the second one. It was like I definitely remember the Eat It video was a big, cultural touch point.
Yeah. Can't look past the expansion suit for sure. Or the dancing. Yeah, Nature Trail to Hell on that album like blew my mind because it was just, I mean, it was an original number one, but it so encapsulated. I was a lucky enough child, and I guess lucky's a weird word, probably in the eyes of my mother at least, that I was able to see some of the original Friday the 13th as a child. My mom and my dad let me watch all kinds of weird stuff, which is probably why I'm as weird as I am now. Probably stuff that was inappropriate for a child at that age. But because I knew of the movies, it really let me into the more, I guess, morbid side of Weird Al.
Okay, yeah,
sure. I mean, did any of that ring true for you as a child, or was it? Yeah,
were you? Did you more dark jokes?
Get any of the dark humor?
Yeah, and then there's like a whole track about an iron lung on that record, and yeah,
well, I think that was the first album, isn't it? Stuff.
No,
the Iron Lung, I'm pretty sure is just the self-titled, right?
All right, yeah, you're right. You're schooling me. Okay.
No worries. I mean, look, that Iron Lung song is dark. It is
very dark. Yeah.
So so you've got a little bit of pop music, you've got some jazz, and you've got some classical. Now, would you say that the jazz and classical went on to inspire you in any kind of a way?
I'm sure on some level, but not like a big. I was never a big classical listener per se. No.
All right. So as we turn around and get through that, did you have any like musical training, like playing the violin or the trombone, or?
I took like piano keyboard lessons for like a year or two, starting in second, third grade, and I got bored and I quit. I was like, hey, this is boring. And I'm sure a lot of that is just lack of discipline. Like I didn't have the parents who were like, you have to practice. Anyway. So they didn't like force me to keep doing it. But then I don't know, like in reflection, I don't know how much of it was just lack of discipline. How much of it was like the way I was instructed was not catered to my mind, or who knows, like I'm playing songs I never heard of, or you just got to memorize scales. Like, instead of like learning the pattern behind how the scales work, it's just, here, memorize this. It goes D, E, and like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about, children being bored by like, rote, lessons and stuff like that. Like you have to be able to teach to the child.
Like it's important to practice. It's important to practice your fingering, but at the same, like, very boring.
It's true. So when we go back to the pop music, like what were some of the things that were, it was 84. So it was obviously like what, Weird Al, Michael Jackson, maybe, like what else?
The Thriller video. Yeah, I definitely was a big like, oh, the Thriller video is coming on. I got to go over there. There's the stuff that you hear in the background of the pop music. You hear the Feels So Good, Chuck Mangione, and all that weird stuff that is in the background of your mind, whether you want it to be or not. And then, like, I remember on, like I said, MTV was a big thing because, there's this channel where you can watch these videos. I remember the Talking Heads videos were always really special. Fish Heads. Like back in the day, they would actually play like the Art of Noise video close to the edit. That was huge.
Yeah, what did your brain do when you saw that?
I like there were certain videos that like immediately registered, like there's something different about this. This isn't just, some pop star like prancing around on stage. There's like, this is really different. Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, you started making your way into let's work our way into like your high school time period, ninth grade, stuff like that. You're really, or when was it? You had told me a pretty hilarious story about a certain pop singer that you were a big fan of, and it didn't go as it wasn't received by your friends as well as you thought it was.
Are you talking about like Debbie Gibson?
So what grade would that have been?
It was I think it was like sixth or seventh grade. I started, like paying more attention to pop music, and I'm sure some of it was just like, here's a cute girl who's like not that much older than me, and she's up there singing and whatever. So I was a Debbie Gibson fan. I had my sister take me to the concert, and then I bought the T-shirt, and I'm like, yeah, I got myself a concert T-shirt, and I made the mistake of wearing it to school, and I was going to like a public school. And in seventh grade in public school, wearing a Debbie Gibson T-shirt was not a cool thing to wear. So I did not make the mistake of ever wearing that shirt again.
So you only wore it once to school. Did it immediately get burned?
Yeah, only once. Once was I don't think I burned it, but it was out of rotation after that.
Right. I remember, man, at that time, because I was so into like novelty and whatnot, Mojo Nixon had like, what was it? Debbie Gibson is having my two-headed love child song. Do you ever hear that one?
Debbie Gibson's pregnant with my two-headed love child. I think it is something. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you have heard that about around the same time?
I was aware of it. I didn't like personally start listening to like much Mojo Nixon until years later. But I was aware of it. Yeah.
And so so this is like 7th, 8th grade. So it sets that shift of like, your public acceptance of like what has to be cool, to get in with your friends or whatever else like that. So it's like, once you felt like that initial like shaming of like, the Debbie Gibson, like how did that affect like your shift towards other music or shift in music in general?
Like, I don't know if I actually stopped listening to Debbie Gibson. I don't remember. But it was definitely like, yeah, don't go around advertising that you're listening to like this kind of stuff. So around that time, I started listening to more like, I would have called it hard rock, hard rock, hair metal kind of stuff. I got it like I went through an Aerosmith phase for some reason. Yeah,
and that's apropos, seeing as we just played the Sweet E by Animals Within Animals to lead into this. So you're into Aerosmith, and you're working. You're doing stuff. What were some of the things that you did in high school that were like creative? Like, did you have a zine or anything, or?
So I had a bunch of projects. Like a friend of mine had an idea to do like a literary magazine for the school. Like there had been an official one that came out like once a year, and it was like done by the faculty and all that stuff. And my friend was like, no, we need to do a student run literary magazine so that it needs to come out like I don't know if it didn't come out like regularly once a month, but it needs to be like multiple issues a year. And so, he and there were three of us who were the editors of that magazine. I was on the school newspaper. And then I did, senior year, I decided I started my own underground newspaper. So at that point, I think I called myself like the king of print media because I was on 3 different publications.
So what did that, when you say you called yourself the king of print media and you're running around school, like was this like some kind of like persona that you would put on and like literally like talk to people and be like, ha 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 ha?
No, talking to people was not something that I was a fan of in high school. I'm like, I'm writing this down because it's easier than talking to people.
Right. But that didn't stop you from wanting to try out for the high school talent show.
Sure. I mean, at this point, I had a love for rock music and all that, but I wanted to do stuff like musically or what we would call multimedia or whatever. But I didn't like have an instrument. I could barely play keyboard. I definitely couldn't play guitar or drums or any of that. So I was like, well, I want to be in a band, but all I can do is sing. I don't know. And so like a couple friends and we talked about doing something for the talent show. We were going to do like one of them, my friends was a Spanish exchange student, and he really wanted to do El Camino by Ween.
Wow, what a good choice.
And but then we were unable to find time to get together to rehearse, even once. So if you can imagine the talent show tryout, where like three teenage boys who have never played together for even 5 minutes, then in front of an audience, then try to perform a song we have not practiced together. Yeah, we didn't get very far into
I think that's amazing too, because it's like having done kind of similar stuff in high school and before, it's like I kind of know how that planning goes, where you call your friends and you're like, all right, we're going to do this and you're going to do that. And like you build this thing up in your head as to like, oh yeah, it's just going to go like we just show up, we do it. it's going to work. Yeah. And you showed up and how badly did it go?
It was like we got, 15, 20 seconds into the song. I was able to go El Camino like one time. And that it was like, I'm sure if you saw like the Shreds videos, it was pretty much along those lines.
And so they hit the gong and they were like, no, thank you very much.
Pretty much. Yeah. We're like, okay, yeah, this isn't happening.
Well, I'm sorry that they stepped on your dreams there, but you have quite the formidable catalog, sir. I have to say, I feel like you've wreaked your revenge on your early critics by at least putting out a prodigious amount of music, and we're going to get into that here on Masters of Mash for those of you watching in the audience. So anyway. So you're getting into like hair metal. When did you really start to get into like, say, like more aggressive music?
When I got to high school, then like there was like heavier stuff was going on. I like freshman year they made us share lockers, so I ended up sharing a locker with a friend of mine who was really into like thrash and death metal and all that stuff. They've like been playing guitar for years and all that stuff. So he and other friends were able to introduce me to some of the more aggressive music that was out there.
Yeah, and this is like 90 to 94 area, right?
Yeah,
all
yeah.
Right. So that'll give us a little idea as to like some of the bands. I'm assuming like not too far of a stretch from Aerosmith, but that time period probably would have been like the Black Album by Metallica. Had you been?
The Black Album had just come out, yeah.
And at that point, like, had you listened to Metallica before?
I had probably seen, like, the one video on MTV, maybe, but that was about it. Yeah. I was...
Now, you keep mentioning MTV. I'm assuming you were just a straight-up, like, MTV, like, from early on through high school and college, like, sitting in front. How much mass media culture would you say you sponged up in those early parts of your life from like birth to high school?
I mean, it's, you're constantly soaking in it, so, and then especially like, even like if you had cable like back then, which I did, there were only 30 or 40 channels at the time. And half of them would have been very boring to a teenager, so I would be like, well, what's on? I guess I can watch MTV. I can watch a game show. I watched a lot of sitcoms. I'm like, well, the best thing that's on right now is a sitcom. If there were any cartoons on any channel at that time, like switch over to USA or.
Yeah, and I think one of the lies that cable TV taught us was, it's pay TV, right? There shouldn't be any commercials, but there were tons and tons of commercials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any commercials very specifically that, just off the top of your head from that time period that would have like made a huge impact on you?
I mean, there are tons of them that you would like if you thought about it for a minute. The first like that comes to mind immediately, obviously, the Life Alert, I've fallen and I can't get up was instantly iconic.
For sure. So you're getting into more aggressive music. You did that right after you graduated high school. You were like, look, if I'm not going to have a band, I'm going to be a one man band, right? You started a
Sure, yeah.
project called the Mighty Mighty Ben
Mm-hmm.
Boy, or was it just called Mighty
Mighty
Ben
Mighty Ben
Boy?
Boy. It was Mighty Mighty Ben Boy because at the time, there was the Mighty Mighty Boss
Ah,
Tones and then the Mighty Lemon Drops or whatever. And I'm like, oh, Mighty Mighty. But then deliberately deflate it with Ben Boy. Like I'm Mighty Mighty, but my name is Ben Boy.
right. Because your real name is Benjamin. Yeah.
Benjamin, yeah.
So tell me about this project.
It was like I said, I was just like eager to be able to make music or work, but I really didn't have gear or too much training or anything. I had like one keyboard that at that point, like I'd gotten it in like '86, so it was already like 8 years old. This old FM synthesis keyboard, and I would have like little handheld tape recorders, so I would like record something on the handheld tape recorder, and then I would have to take that tape and then go put it in the stereo and like play it over the stereo so that I could do my second track. So it was like extremely primitive 2-track recordings. Like I would record my keyboard line and then do vocals on top of it, or vice versa.
How would you say, what would the style of those early recordings be?
Um, there was definitely like a novelty aspect to it, but early bedroom producer experiments. I'd have to bring up a track list, but yeah, there was a lot of just like rambling, like nonsense. I think my first track was called Party. And it was like, oh, I got a party, 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 party. It was like a conversation. Like, hey, come on, man, we're going to have a party, 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 party. And then there's like a hater. He's like, oh, I hate your party. And he's like, oh, we're just partying, 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 man. That was my first Mighty Mighty Ben Boy track 1 on the Mighty Mighty Ben Boy tape.
That's kind of amazing. Now, I don't want to get too far into this, but I mean, because I still definitely want to talk about your college years. But I'm noticing that some of your pre stAllio stuff, you've got Barbershop Demo, which is the thing you're talking about now. Funeral for a Ben.
Okay, so like, well, there were 3 Ben Boy tapes. There was the Ben Boy, and then the second one was called 420 on an Undercover Cop. And then Funeral for a Ben was like, kind of like I'm retiring this Ben Boy project, so this is going to be the final thing under this name, Mighty Mighty Ben Boy.
What happened to the I Love Bob Dole EP?
I think that was in the. I think it was technically on the Funeral for a Ben cassette, because it was like I'm transitioning into this stAllio project. Or
so how did was the style similar from that Barbershop Demo all the way, or was there any kind of evolution during that time period?
Well, it was like the Ben Boy tapes were all, like I said, very primitive. There was a lot of primitive tape experiments, and then like my very first attempts to make music on the computer, stuff like that. And then by the time the Barbershop Demo was like my first release with a 4-track recorder, so I was able to do much better production. I mean, I'm not saying that the production on it was good,
right?
But I was able to actually like do real multi-tracking where you could do it, and if it wasn't good, you could record over it, or you could change the volume levels, and I would do all the crazy panning and stuff. The point of the Barbershop was that I had no real gear, and it was still like making music on a computer at like 1996 was like difficult. And so like Barbershop was like, the whole conceit was like, oh, I can make music. I don't need any gear. I can do it all with just a microphone and my voice. So that like the drums, I would like beatbox for the drums, and then I would like do my scat bass line or whatever, and then I would have my sung vocal track or whatever on top of that. So it was all vocals, beatboxing and stuff. And then because I had no effect gear or no compressor or anything, like I said, the production on it was still kind of hit or miss. But
And again, like you're at that point, you're still using the handheld tape recorders, yeah.
No, like this is a
Okay, so that's why
four-track.
was that
Yeah, so
why
if
the
anybody doesn't know,
barbershop?
hmm?
Because it's like barbershop
Yeah, barbershop
quartet,
was a
meaning like
four-track.
four and
Four
one
channels
Ben.
and one stAllio. Yeah. It's like if anybody doesn't know, a four-track it was like you could get a normal cassette, but it was like a more professional type of gear. You put your cassette in, and it gave you four channels, right? Because normally a cassette, it's got two sides, and then there's a left and right channel for each side. So there's four channels on a normal cassette, but the four-track recorder would let you record on all four of them at the
At the
same time,
same time. That was the height of
which was
technology.
it was definitely a big deal. Yeah, at the time, 25
So
years
I'm
ago.
assuming you went directly from high school to college, yes? So then this
Yeah.
would have been in the middle of college, right? Or the beginning
Yeah.
parts to middle?
Um, the Ben Boy tapes were like early college, and then by like junior senior year, I was doing more of the four-track kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about that transition from high school to college. First of all, where'd you go to school and why did you choose this place?
I went to a school called Southeast Missouri State, and I went because they offered me the best scholarship.
Okay. That's good. What kind of a gift? I mean, obviously you're on the yearbook or the newspaper, and you're doing all this creative writing. Was there a specific focus to
Mm-hmm.
the scholarship?
No, no, it was just a general like, hey, we want talented students at our school that nobody's heard of. So if you run like some state school that's not in the top five state schools or in your state or whatever, how do you attract talent? Whether that their scheme was scholarships that they would send, like, yeah.
All right. And so tell me about like, getting onto camp. Were you living on campus or were you driving there back and forth?
I no, I it's like a five six
Oh,
hour
okay.
drive from there. So yeah, I would. Yeah, we lived on campus in the dorms, and I lived in the dorms for 4 years, which is unusual, but because it was like part of the scholarship, so I would lose money if I had moved off campus, right? It would be more expensive.
Yeah. But so you're making all these tapes. Tell me about like the evolution of your own like personal likes and tastes, and then how were your tapes received by your friends?
Um, I mean, like I would play stuff for the friends, and they would be able to appreciate the humor and entertainment of it. It's like when you're like in that time, it's like, hey, if you could do anything, then that's, oh, hey, that's pretty cool. People weren't telling me, oh, this is really shittily produced. Oh, you need a compressor. No, they weren't. It was, yeah,
So you had supportive friends, and that's good.
sure,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
what was it? Was there any kind of like campus radio? Did you wind up participating in any of that?
There was a campus radio station, and then I did not really have much to do with
Okay.
it. I didn't get a show or anything. I had friends who were like had shows, and I would call in occasionally or stuff like that.
Yeah. And then
But I didn't, yeah, work on the station or
did
anything.
you continue your writing from high school into like, any kind of like paper in college or anything?
Yeah, I did. I ended up majoring in English, got a creative writing specialty, so I did some writing for that. I did um, eventually write on the school newspaper. I had a column senior year.
What was the focus of your column?
It was just like whatever random thoughts entered my mind. So yeah. I remember there was one time where like there was a big like they would really harp about apathy, like student apathy. Like you got to be less apathetic. You got to come out to sporting events or whatever. And I wrote a column like in defense of apathy. And like they ran it, but they had to put like their rebuttal on the other page. So like you open up the page, and then the first here's like their rebuttal. Like, we were offended by this pro apathy column, and then over here's my column. It's like, yeah, in defense of apathy.
Well, at least you were on the right side.
Yeah, I was literally on the right side in the recto page. Yeah.
So your musical tastes in high school were like, Aerosmith, working your way into like Metallica. At what point did
Hmm.
industrial or grindcore or noise or, anything like intelligent dance music, IDM
Hmm.
really start to like take
Right.
effect?
I like in high school I was had listened to like Ministry and Nine Inch Nails and some of that stuff. But it wasn't like probably the sophomore year in college. I had a roommate who had a bunch of techno and industrial, and he introduced me to Coil and Aphex Twin, a lot of stuff like that. And then that was when I started to transition, and I kind of became a bit of an electronic music snob. Like I was kind of like anti-guitar for a good 10 years after that. I'm like, guitars are boring.
I totally 100% agree with that. Almost still to this day for me, because it's like if I
Hmm.
hear one more white guy opine over a guitar about the breakup of him and his girlfriend,
Hmm.
it's just been done so many times over and over and over and over, and it will never stop. But specifically on the industrial tip, and getting into like Aphex Twin and stuff like that, you were also paired together with more mainstream tastes. Like, tell me about, like, you had said very much that Beck was a huge influence on you.
Yeah. Um, it was just like Beck was a big influence on lots of people at the time because he was able to incorporate the hip hop thing with like the weird folk music and like Delta blues and all of these things, and that was like there was a time after that where like every band had to have a drum machine, and like even like the Butthole Surfers, who were like the big crazy hard rockers, they had their Beck ripoff album, and they got like a did Pepper hit like number one? That was like a
Yes.
huge hit
Yes,
for
it
them,
did.
and like their pretty obvious Beck ripoff. It was just that time, and it was like I had listened to some hip hop, before that, like Far Side and stuff like that. But I don't know. The Beck thing was like giving me permission as a white boy to incorporate more hip hop flavor into my work, or what I don't even know. To actually write raps as a white guy, and I don't know. It's dumb,
Right.
but
I mean, you were in the.
at the time,
Did you go to school with a racially diverse, group of people?
in college, not so much. Like in I grew up in like racially diverse neighborhoods, and grammar school and so junior high and so on were more diverse. But then when I got to college, I mean there was some diversity, but it was a fairly white campus. It was like we had more Turks than anything else. There was like a big like Turkish exchange program.
Interesting.
So like there were some black students and Asians and so on, but there were also a lot of Turkish students.
Yeah.
That's just whatever how it was.
So tell me, like, at the end of Mellow Gold by Beck, there is this
Hmm.
real crazy arcade style noise freakout track.
Bonus
Was it?
noise.
Yeah,
Bonus noise.
bonus
Yeah.
noise. Yeah, for sure. Tell me, in what way did that help? Did that inspire you?
The that was good. And the bonus noise were on the Beck records were some of my favorite stuff on the records. And maybe I would have friends and I'd mention the bonus noise and they'd be like, oh yeah, I hate that. And I'm like, that's like some of my favorite stuff.
Because around that same time, or
And it wasn't just Mellow Gold. It was like his like the Stereopathetic Soul Manure,
yes,
and I think Odile all had like copious amounts of like weird bonus noise. Like here's your record, and then here's a bunch of just extra junk at the end.
yeah, Stereopathetic Soul Manure is such a great album. Like, just all the tape interspersed, like you can hear him like record over the tape that he's, had taken to like make his song. Especially
Hmm.
Today has been a fucked up day. What a great, banjo pair of stairs and like a microphone running back and forth.
Hmm.
If you haven't heard it, go listen to that. So here we are. You're listening to this stuff. You told me that around '96 you started to work with a specific piece of equipment or a piece of software that I hadn't seen. I didn't know about until like maybe early to mid 2000s, but you knew about it in the early in 1996, called a tracker. Can you explain what a tracker is?
Right. Well, like I said, in the mid '90s, it was very difficult to make any kind of music on a computer, and like the most of the more professional type software, like Cubase or whatever, would have been really expensive. But yeah, my roommate introduced me to Scream Tracker, which was a tracker program, and it's like you'd have a grid, and it's like weird like vertical grid, so it like you start at the top and then it's like scrolls up, and then you could like enter your notes like on the keyboard, so you press A for C and then S for like it's if you imagine that your piano keys were somehow transposed onto the keyboard, then you could do it like that, and then you could change the like which sample you're triggering
and so as it moved up,
all that stuff.
It wound up. It was kind of like a sequencer. Like maybe there's a line, and it's like you program one line, and as it passes,
there's like like each pattern or whatever would have, I don't even remember how many lines, 32 lines or so. And then you press play and it would scroll up and it would hit. Yeah, so it's weird, and like even now it's very different from like a drum machine where you would have kind of the step sequencer, and it's very different.
Yeah. So when you have this like step sequencer kind of a thing, does it take samples, or was it just like keyboard notes?
It was any sample, and then it would play them at the keyboard note that you triggered. So you could take any sample and then you could play it, and you could change your octave. You could say play it like super low, or you could play it super high, and all of that stuff.
And so what were you sampling at the time?
Well, this was again in the '90s. Like it's hard to even like think back of, but it was so difficult to do anything back then. Like in 1995, 96, when I got this stuff, like you wouldn't have had any music on your computer. It would be weird to like have. This was before MP3 and all that stuff. So like if there were any kind of musical files on your computer at all, it would have been either like from your video game music, or like MIDI files or stuff
System
like that.
sounds.
System sounds, right. So like if you had these, like a tracker or like a mod, like also they'd call them mods, or like Fast Tracker was a more popular tracker than Screen Tracker. But you would like download a song that somebody else had done. Like they would distribute their tracker files, and then you would like steal the samples from their song and put it in. So like some early samples that I had were what was the Front 242 song with the "Hey Poor, you don't have to be poor anymore."
Yeah. Hey Poor.
That was one like "Hey Poor." That was an early sample that I had. There was the Cool Keith sample that the Prodigy had sampled on the. Like I always had it as "I'm going to break to another dimension," but I don't think that's actually the lyric.
Oh gosh, I was thinking "Smack My Bitch Up," but it's the earlier sample in the song.
There was like 3 Prodigy records later. I'm talking about like
the earlier stuff. Yes.
Break to another dimension. Pay close attention. But I don't. That wasn't the actual lyric.
Yeah, I feel.
It was something about.
I feel like your brain is mashing that up with the Beastie Boys there. Another dimension.
No, this was the Prodigy.
Yeah.
But it was way before Firestarter or any of that. So there was it was really hard. Like I had to like buy a mic just so I would be able to like record sounds, like me hitting an ashtray or something, like ding ding, to get samples. But this was a big. I eventually switched to Impulse Tracker instead of Scream Tracker. I'm not sure why. They were very similar. But one thing that I was just like scrolling around in my files, and it allowed me to discover that it would allow me to play any file on my computer as if it were a sample. And I would just go through and I would just play it, and it would go. And I was like, what? So yeah, I spent a lot of time just like browsing around my hard drive and just listening to all of the different data files.
And at that point, were you like taking them and arranging them in any kind of like percussive way or sequenced?
I did one track while I was in college using those sounds. It wasn't particularly good. because I wasn't much of a producer yet, and also, like I said, the interface on the trackers was weird, and it was not one that I had really mastered. Like even now, like I would do stuff, and I wouldn't like if I wouldn't be limited to a pattern or anything, so it would just continue, and you just like, well, I have to play the patterns in this order, or the song doesn't work.
Yeah.
It was lots of things that if I were doing now, I would know how to do it better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
so
the process, isn't it?
Yeah. So there was one song that I did with those sounds, and it was okay, but it was just it wasn't until later that I like after college I said, I'm going to revisit these sounds and I'm going to do something for real with this.
Well, when we get into your post-college times
Yeah.
and your super group that you formed, that being said, you met some of these people that later went on to be in your group, Animals Within Animals, in college. Who was the first?
I met them while I was in college. Although I met them, I would like back home. I would go home for summer break or spring break, and then I would hang out with my friends back home. Some of those people later on, became part of Animals Within Animals, or they were, part of the Bad Taste crew or whatever.
Yeah. Your first of that crew really being a guy named Merkbox?
Merkbox, yeah. I probably met him in like 1995 or 96, if not then, yeah.
Did you wind up doing anything with him then? Or was it later after college?
It was not much then, no.
Okay.
No, we would, sit around and listen to music, but no, we didn't like collaborate musically at that time.
So you graduated college in 98.
Although I will say Merkbox did produce the I Love Bob Dole EP that you mentioned earlier.
He did produce it?
He produced it, yeah. He was like the drum beats on that. He did those, and then I recorded that like on his studio.
All right.
So that was our first collaboration that I had written some of these songs, like the I Love Bob Dole, and then like he produced that EP for me.
That's awesome.
Like 1997 or 98 probably.
So right as you were leaving college. Okay.
Yeah.
So once college is over, you move out of the dorms back home to your parents?
Yeah.
And you're hanging out with, Merkbox. And at what point did you meet Dr. Butcher, MD?
I met Dr. Butcher. He was still in going to IU Bloomington at the time. So I met him sometime when he was on his break. And I met him through Merkbox and some other mutual friends, and he came up. Actually, at the time, Merkbox and I were living together in a house at that time. And Dr. Butcher came to visit us, and I was like, hey, I'm working on this this thing with this like data files, this music, and I should check it out. And played some stuff for him. And then later on, Merkbox told me, yeah, he really liked it. I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, I know him well enough to tell that he was really into that. I'm like, okay, cool. And so I then eventually, because he had already formed a label, Bad Taste, and so Merkbox had put out like a split cassette on that label, and I was like, that was partly why I wanted to play it for him.
Now, to talk about that label, Bad Taste Records, from what I'd gathered online, it said that Dr. Butcher MD started that in 1997 as a affiliate label to Freak Show Records, started by a guy named Keith Ping. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about Keith Ping?
Yeah, they were there. Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I know Keith. They were like friends and roommates and so on. And so Freak Show was like, it was like a gabber kind of hardcore techno kind of label. Yeah. Focused on vinyl.
For people who don't understand what gabber is, can you explain what gabber is?
Gabber it's like really fast, heavy techno where there are like lots of like kick drums. Like there's a kick drum every like beat. So it goes boom, 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 boom. And so basically every gabber song goes like boom.
How does
boom,
that differentiate
boom,
from
boom,
happy hardcore?
I'm not an expert on that. I think happy hardcore is more about like sped up samples and
no pressure. Same way with breakcore.
Right.
Do you see any differences there?
Well, breakcore, like officially, you'd say breakcore is to jungle what gabber might be to techno. So breakcore originally, like the idea was that the breaks, right? So they're like jungle breaks or whatever, and just like a heavier, faster take on that. Now, of course, lots of stuff that people call breakcore doesn't necessarily have breaks or a jungle aspect to it, but
yeah,
that was if you were going by textbook definitions or whatever, then that was the original idea.
So, like I said, I learned online that Freak Show started in '97, or Freak Show started in '97. They called themselves a hardcore, breakcore, and noisecore label from Bloomington, Indiana. Okay. Founded by Keith Ping, and then of course Bad Taste was an affiliated sister label. And then around 1999, they tried to put out a release, and they got some feedback from their distributor of like people want specifically Gabber from one label. They don't want a label that's going to diversify as much, so they decided to try to split into two labels. This is Freak Show we're talking about, into Dominion and into Freak Show, with Freak Show being the noisecore and the the weirder stuff, and then the Gabber stuff Dominion specifically being Dominion. And immediately after that, trying to bankroll a label and trying to do everything else like that is really hard, especially in that time period, like 1999. So they immediately folded. But it's funny, and it's not funny that funny is the wrong word, I should say. It's interesting to me that the sister label that wound up like housing a lot of the stranger, the noisier, the more data bent or data sound kind of music that you did, or the sampledelic kind of breakcore or whatnot that, like, say, Stunt Rock did, wound up being the longer lasting label well into, like, is Bad Taste still around? Technically. Yeah, because I know it lasted.
When I put out stuff, I still put it out on Bad Taste. Usually.
Yeah, according to Dr. Butcher MD, on something that he had put online, that there were phases of Bad Taste records, that it went from like 98 to 2003, and then was revived in 2007 to 2010, and then it wound up going from 2011 until whatever it is now, kind of a thing. Let's get into that early period of Bad Taste real quick, where you've just told Butcher MD, Dr. Butcher MD, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drop the doctor, which also, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is a fantastic old horror film called Dr. Butcher MD, which, as you know and I know, but maybe they don't know, like, a lot of Dr. Butcher MD's music sampled a lot of old Hammer horror.
A lot of horror themes and horror samples,
horror movie samples. So you just kind of met him, showed him your thing. Merkbach says, hey, he really kind of likes this. Where did it go from there? You said something about going to like shows, Freak Show, like barn shows or something?
There was one of the arguably the biggest breakcore label in the Midwest was called Addict Records, out of the Milwaukee area. And they had a series of events. Like one guy in the crew his family had a farm or whatever, and so they had this barn out in East Troy, Wisconsin, and they would do barn parties. They get the PA, and then everybody would drive up, and you would camp at the barn, like sleep in your car or put up a tent or whatever. And then they would bring like hardcore and breakcore acts would come up and do live PAs and DJ mixes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we would party in a barn, Midwest style.
And the biggest acts on Addict Records at the time were like Dormouse and Stunt Rock, right?
Dormouse, Stunt Rock became one of the stars. I don't know if he initially was, but it was Dormouse, Anonymous, J Slim, and some other acts that were in the early Addict roster, Press Board. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the most important ones, but you know how it goes.
Now, at this point, were you getting most of the releases off of cassette or CD, or was this on file sharing? What was this?
there would be like mixtapes. I would have some access to mixtapes, but like one of the reason you would go to the shows like barn parties is because there would be people like distros there. There would be, if you wanted to buy the Attic records, the easiest way to do it would be to go and buy them directly from Dormouse himself.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, or like other people who were into the scene and had their own distro, and then they would go, and then you would, so one of the reasons that you would go to the events was to actually buy the records, because otherwise you'd have to mail order them, and it would be expensive. And like mail ordering in 1999 or 2000 was much more complicated than it is now.
Right. Yeah, half the time it wasn't a 1-800 number or anything. It was like you had to mail to a P.O. box and wait for the response, and then
you read a list of things and you're like, well, I guess I want whatever that is. And then, you would like write them a letter or what? Yeah.
Back in my day. Yeah. So you go to this show, and you had said that you really had tried to like maybe have some sort of performance there. What did you have in mind?
It was okay. Well, the very first barn party was very freeform in that there was like a flyer that went out, and the flyer just had a bunch of names on it, And so at that point, there was sort of like an open invite to certain people, like Dr. Butcher and D and those people. They got to like spin a little bit and so on. But we were going to do, it would have been like a noise improv kind of thing. Like we like got together to rehearse once just to make sure we could do it. Like a few of us got together with some gear and we're like, yeah, we can jam out. And we were just going to go on stage and just completely jam out, like with nothing prepared really or anything. So maybe in the long run, the fact that we didn't get to play would have been a good thing. I don't know, because we didn't get to perform. But that
Shades of High School talent show.
Sure, like I mean, it would have been, we would have actually performed as opposed to like getting through 10 seconds and then quitting. But so at the time, I was pitching the name Animals and Animals as the name for this group, and so in that sense, could be considered like the first version of Animals Within Animals, although we hadn't agreed on that name.
But you had floated the name on the way up, right?
I did float the name as well, what about Animals and Animals? I'm like, maybe, and when you're pitching names to your bandmates, nobody can agree on anything. So
where did that come from? The Animals Within Animals.
I took a sociology class in college, and it was an extremely boring lecture class, the kind of class where you just have to sit there and listen to the guy drone on and write down whatever he says, because it's not necessarily a book. You just kind of, this guy's up there and lecturing. It was like warning signs in a child's drawing that the child had been like abused.
Okay.
And so it was Animals Within Animals, people with missing heads, or people like without limbs. And I think there was a fourth one. It was maybe like people with extra limbs or something like that. Like if you see these in a child's drawing, then you should be concerned because maybe this child has been abused, and I'm like, but there was that phrase Animals Within Animals. I wrote that down, and that definitely stuck with me.
Now, when we were talking about earlier, like the darker themes and like Weird Al Yankovic, and when we talk about like specifically, like you went to a Catholic school growing up, didn't you?
I alternated between Catholic schools and public schools.
And your parents were pretty religious growing up, right?
Relatively, sure.
At what point?
Not like strict, but devout, but not like strict.
At what point did you wind up like kind of like, I mean, obviously, throughout the themes of punk rock and like industrial and stuff like that, a lot of these themes are present. But at what point did you like push against religion or push against any kind of like that shaped this? What shaped these, needs to say, hey, here, I'm going to put some abuse in my, references to abuse?
It's like going to Catholic high school, I think it kind of like taught me to rebel, because there's kind of like this, like these strict rules, and you got to wear your uniform a certain way, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And I didn't really have a very good time in high school. And it was sort of like, well, here's the establishment, and they're trying to make me do these things. And I like, well, of yours, I'm going to do something different. Right. So even down to like starting the underground newspaper, like I hate this place, and I'm going to start my own publication for it, So like I honestly I don't know if I'd gone to like a public school, would I have gotten into really heavy music and all of this, confrontational stuff? I don't even know.
Well, I mean, I'm also assuming because like a lot of my Schadenfreude and like a lot of my love of things that mock religion and stuff come out of my experiences in the 80s with the Satanic Panic and with all of the stuff that was the hypocrisy of televangelism and stuff like that. Was that any kind of driver for that?
Somewhat like, yeah, they're definitely, the making fun of televangelists and all that. But then like, because I was listening to like death and thrash metal, and there was a lot of the Satanism and that stuff. Like, oh yeah,
celebratory, existentialism through morbidity.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I got this deicide tape. Look at how many inverted crosses are on the front cover and all that kind of fun stuff.
So just more like, like anger posturing.
Sure, yeah. It was like, if you're young and depressed, then you're going to relate to like either music that's really sad or music that's really like angry.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
That's just being a teenager / college student. Like, growing up is angst, and you look for things to rebel and look for things to whatever else like that. So, okay, so Animals Within Animals, you float the name, you do the show, or you go to the show, it doesn't happen. At what point do you come back? First of all, can you identify more people that wound up being in that early iteration of Animals Within Animals, and what the supergroup, how it came about?
Okay, the people who would have been who would have performed, it would have been me, Dr. Butcher, another guy who was at the time going by Backstatic, and I believe his wife, Ankle Sniper, was also in the group at the time. I think it was us four who would have been.
All right.
Would have been jammed out in that performance. So it was okay when I was like out and I was doing music as stAllio and all this stuff. And excuse me. When you're young and perform and like you're starting out in your art practice, you don't really know how to do anything. And so like often you're like eager to collaborate with other people because other people know how to do things that you don't know how to do. And so you're like, I really want to collaborate with people so that I can expand my base and like do things. Like I wasn't comfortable with writing beats or that kind of stuff very much at that time. So I was really eager to collaborate with my friends and with other people, but I had seen like some people will have like 20 different projects under different names. There's like, well, if it's me, then it's this, and if it's me and Steve, then it's that, and me, Steve, and Alan, then it's this other thing. And then they would have so many different projects that you couldn't keep track of them. Like you wouldn't even know about them all, right? Let alone find them all. And I didn't want to have to do that because I wanted to be able to collaborate with a bunch of people, and I didn't want to have 30 projects with 1 or 2 tracks on each. So the idea was that Animals Within Animals would be sort of a catch-all project where anytime I collaborated with anybody, we could put that name on it, and it would be like a group. And it was like structurally it was modeled on it was an industrial band called Pigface, where there was basically like Martin Atkins was the drummer, was like the one guy who was always in Pigface, and then whoever else was in the studio, whoever else was just hanging out, then they would like do some stuff.
Didn't Martin just die like just recently this year?
Martin Atkins die?
Yeah, I want to say he died in like March.
Yeah,
which is sad. I mean, Pigface like had probably well over 100 different people like were at least involved in, if not touring, like recording, but also like remix projects with him. It's crazy from Genesis Peorage to who else would have been in that?
Oh, there's so many people. Leslie Rankine, there was Ogre from Skinny Puppy did some stuff with them. Trent Reznor did at least 1 or 2 songs.
Yeah, I saw that like members of like Sheep on Drugs were parts of that, and
sure, yeah. I think they were probably members of like KMFDM, or like you'd have to like look it up and say who are all these people who because maybe they only did a few things here and there, or maybe
Yeah,
like,
I glanced
they
at
did,
the
like,
wiki and saw, and I was just like, wow, just really blown away by how many people really collaborated with Pigface. So like you really had this idea of like, look, if I do a collaboration with somebody, this is my project. You're now in Animals Within Animals. But that being
right.
said, like I feel like it not just being this like, you and hundreds of people, like you had some pretty core members for like specific time periods. And so you said the initial 4 people that were there, or in addition to you, so I guess it would have been 5. Was that?
No,
It
it
was
was
just
4.
4?
Okay, go on. Yeah.
Because it was Dr. Butcher MD, and then Backstatic, and then it was Backstatic's wife,
Yeah,
and then
and
you.
then
So
me. Yeah.
Merkbox was not a part of that initially.
I don't remember him going to that show, but if maybe I talked to him, he'd be like, yeah, of course I was there. I don't
Right.
He was definitely involved with Animals Within Animals from an early time, but I don't specifically remember him going to the first barn party with us.
Right. Now, at what point did that turn into like recording? Like, what would be your first recording from that?
I don't know, because it was like part of it was like back in the days. It was you could like you'd go to somebody's house and then like, hey, I'm going to come over and we're going to record. We're going to make music together, and that was a lot of fun. We don't really work that way anymore. So yeah, it was just like, hey, I'm going to come over and we're going to make some tracks.
Yeah.
And then like, I would go down to Bloomington and we would record, or I would go to Merkbox's house and we would like work on stuff. And so.
And you said that you were.
I don't.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know like what was the first song recorded.
But at this point, you were already doing stuff as stAllio, though, right?
Yeah.
When did that come? When did that name and that persona come about?
It was like it was a weird in joke. I was making these like comic strips that were like in jokes about people that we knew at school. And then my character in the comic strip was originally called the Stallion because I was a big Ween fan.
Yes.
So yeah, my character was called the Stallion, and then like I there was some storyline where I like lost the right to be called the Stallion. I think I cut my hair was what it was. Like I initially had long hair and then I cut my hair shorter at one point, and so in the story was like I lost the title of Stallion and like I just became stAllio.
So you lost the N.
Or that was like my name was stAllio and I was the Stallion until I lost the right to be the stAllio, sort of like Thor became unworthy to be Thor, even though he was still named Thor.
Right.
But he wasn't Thor, you know what I mean?
So here's a question. At that time, and because I know that, fonts and like text mean things to you, at the time, were you spelling it lowercase st, capital A? And at one point I saw that you had the first L was actually an exclamation, or no, the first L was an L and then an exclamation point and then an IO. Like what drove the different spellings of your name?
It's like, cause I was a writer and I was big on like experimental forms of creative writing and stuff. And so like I started like very early on, like as soon as I got on the internet, I started like not capitalizing anything on my internet posts and so on. And then, so like part of the idea, like I adapted the stAllio name with a big and the exclamation point at the end pretty early on, but it was like, oh, well, if you're going to have a capital letter in the name, it doesn't have to be the first letter, And so that was that. And then I would be like, oh, my initials, I would have, even my initials would not be the first letter in the name, like the A would actually be my first initial, even though it was the third letter in the name and stuff like that. So it was definitely all about like youthful playing with form.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cause I remember when I first came across it, somebody was making a joke that was like, you were actually trying to be Saint Allion, like the ST meant like saint. Mm-hmm. Or whatever else, which ties into some of the earlier stuff that you did online, like your first webpage. You were doing a thing called stAllio's Way, which was like you doing sermons.
Yeah, I had my weekly sermon. It was just like a column, but I called them sermons. Yeah.
Any insight into, like, again, I'm seeing these themes of like religion and abuse and stuff like that. So.
It like at the time I had like a fairly militant atheist phase where I'm like, I'm an atheist. Like I wrote like a column in the school newspaper about why I'm an atheist and all of this stuff. And so yeah, it was just like, hey, I'm an atheist and it's cool and I'm still like a good guy and all this stuff. And so I was like, here's my little pseudo church, the stAllio's Way atheistic church, and I'm up here in my pulpit and I'm giving you my sermons, but my sermons are about whatever random thing I wanted to write about that week.
Yeah. And so your early stAllio work with your music started, like, say, you said before Animals Within Animals, so that would have been like, you would have tied that immediately after the Mighty Mighty Ben thing, like, say, 97 maybe? What would you say that would be?
I don't know, like I got, like my first website was on GeoCities, and that would have been maybe even 96 or whatever. Like before you could even get your real URL, you had to pick the neighborhood. Yeah. Like I was like, well, I'm in Soho. That's the artist neighborhood. And so my address was, geocities.com/Soho/9024, I believe was my specific address on because like, yeah. And so I would have had, the stAllio's Way would have been from even from that point, but I didn't necessarily make music under the name stAllio right away because I had the Ben Boy project.
Right. So really stAllio came about as part of this stAllio's Way thing.
It was because like I said, the comic strip and the Stallion and then the stAllio, it was all around that time.
At that point, were you familiar with the Subgenius, Cult of the Subgenius?
I don't think I heard about Subgenius until like 2000.
Okay. So it's funny because it's like you have all of these things that probably should have been there, but around that same time of you getting out of college and, starting to go to shows and like really get more into this kind of culture, like firsthand, and out of the dorm rooms, you were where were you working when you first, because you supposedly a coworker handed you a or told you about Negative Land?
Yeah, I was working at it was Pearson, but I don't know if we were actually called Pearson. I don't know if we'd actually been like sold to Pearson yet. So I was working in publishing and in computer publishing, and one of the guys who did like IT at the company was a friend, and I was talking to him about music, and he was like, "Oh, have you heard Negative Land? They sound like cut up TV commercials." And I was like, "Oh, I need to immediately find this because that sounds incredible."
Yeah. And so you heard about that. You wind up hearing about, Church of the Subgenius. You wound up putting out more stuff. You actually started putting out releases in '99. I think it was your first release. Does that sound about right?
The first
Dissonance is Bliss.
The first official stAllio release that was not like a home tape. That was like my first release on Bad Taste was it was Dissonance is Bliss. It was like we talked earlier about the raw data files that I could do in Impulse Tracker, and I said after graduation I said, okay, I want my first official release of my adult career. I want to go back and revisit those sounds because these are like some really interesting sounds.
Yeah.
And like I wasn't aware of anybody else who was doing anything quite like that. So I said, I want to revisit this, and I want to go, now that I'm a little better at producing in this program, I want to go back and revisit these sounds and do like a whole release based on this kind of material. Yeah. So that was Dissonance is Bliss.
And then shortly, if not, what was the space between you making Dissonance is Bliss and then Perpetual Emotion Machine? Because they both seem to come out about the same time, like 1999, but...
it was okay. I finished Dissonance was Bliss was supposed to be a split cassette, and I forget who was going to be on the other side. Maybe it was Masochistic Ear, but I was going to be a split cassette. So I finished it. I finished 28 minutes of material, and then it like the other side didn't happen. Like so, it's like, well, it's not going to be a split. So you want to do it another side. And I was like, oh, okay, but I didn't want to like have to sit down and like spend months composing another 30 minutes of material. So I did like more like jam stuff. There was one where it was like a long jam that I just did in the program, just like pressing keys and cute triggering samples. And then I had like a car. My car was kind of a shitty car at the time. I called it kaput. And like the car stereo like had bad wiring. So when like it would make this like noise, like when I like you could hear like the car speeding up and slowing down through the stereo. So I did a piece like that. I was like, yeah, corrupted through my car stereo, where I play a tape and then I played it over the stereo, and so you can hear my car noise. That was the final. So it basically like this whole side, second side was like just like noisy stuff to complete the tape. And by that point, I think I'd probably like Perpetual Emotion Machine was more like 4-track, and there was like keyboards and stuff, but it was a lot of found objects and stuff. I'm like, I'm going to like any objects that are sitting around the room, I can, with some water glasses and things that I can bang up.
More of a 4-track, like, analog approach, whereas the other one was screen tracker, right?
It was impulse tracker. It was all computer, and this one was all, there were a couple computer songs, but it was mostly like keyboards and mic, found sound, found objects and stuff like that.
Now, that being said, Yard Ape came out about 2000? And that's an Animals with Animals release. How did that work into your recording schedule? Because again, I mean, this is at least it looks like 3 albums in 1 year, but you said it's like kind of like 1 album, 2 sides, and then
there was
Animals within Animals.
And there was some overlap in the timing, but like Animals within Animals was like you would go over to someone's house and we would record some stuff together. Maybe on the 4-track or maybe on like using their gear stuff. There was definitely a bunch of 4-track stuff on that first one. And then like if I was at home doing stuff by myself, maybe then it would go on to Perpetual Emotion Machine. But if I was recording with other people, then it would go on Animals Within Animals.
Right. Now that early Animals Within Animals, this is, what would you say, like, how does that differ from, like, say, your release in 2001, Mano a Mano? Like, tell me about, like, some of the early, like, instruments you were using, like, the way that the sound had evolved between Yard Ape and Mano a Mano.
Well, in the very beginning, Animals Within Animals was more like a noise, hardcore kind of project, like noisecore and stuff. And we would, keyboards and stuff, but there was a lot of, like, tape button, like 4 tracks and all that stuff. And then I like discovered Negative Land like partway through. So I started like, it was a big thing because I'd been listening to a lot of like, breakcore and a lot of stuff that was very heavily sample based, but like hearing Negative Land, and it like really took it in a whole different direction. And like, you can really be really transformative with this stuff and create your own kind of tapestries. So I was kind of inspired and I started bringing in more sampling stuff. But then, so that first record was like half noise and half noise with samples. And then, so Mano a Mano was maybe the first time where we were officially moving in this direction for the whole release. It wasn't kind of a hodgepodge. It was like, this is a record where there's a lot of samples, but there's also a lot of noise. And it's kind of that intersection between noise and noisecore and sound collage.
Yeah. And so that's where we get to the modern mashup era of like 2000, 2001, where you guys have put out this album, which is Animals with Animals, Mano a Mano, right here. And you'll notice that track 1, disc 1 is Hello, which wound up on, if you'll hold up that copy that you have of Nevermind the Bootlegs, put out by Boom Selection back in the day. Tell me about, like, so again, you're obviously really kind of like up to your eyeballs in like internet culture and like music and, stuff specifically within your scene. And if, for anybody who is familiar with Boom Selection back in the day, they primarily championed mashups, but they also talked a lot about breakcore, a lot about like IDM, a lot about jungle and stuff like that, and just like sample-adelic stuff. And because you're mixing a lot on this album with like breakcore and stuff like that, with like really humorous cut-ups, just lots of like sampling. You obviously caught their ear. I was really lucky to get this copy like way back in the day. I still have the original stickers that come inside of it. I think this intellectual property might be stolen. Please remix. And then you and I, way back in the day, were on a mailing list called Snuggles, which was a Negative Land fan-based list, kind of, where we were. A lot of the people on there were, producers of this kind of music. And
Yeah.
well, here, please sample. Let's get into the other. What are you looking at, human? And, you did a good job on the design of this. And it's a 2-disc set. Well, there's one. I can't get the thing. Oh, there we go. Obviously, home printed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Tell me how you came across like Boom Selection and all that stuff. Would it have been through the list?
It was through Snuggles, because like everybody on the list, especially at that time, we were all really into all of this stuff. I don't know if there were actually like British people on the list who got into it, but somehow people on the list started talking about, hey, have you heard about this UK bootleg scene? Because that was back when they were calling it booty and bootlegs and all that. And so they're like, hey, have you heard of this and this stuff? And so I got really into that at the time. And it was like, of course, obviously stuff, Freelance Hellraiser and all of that. Really classic material from that was really exciting. And I was the first person to play as a DJ to play mashups here in Indianapolis and all that. But at the time, like the scene, like you said, it wasn't just what we would now call like the mashups. It was like they were like Ozamizo, Cassette Boy.
Oh, yeah.
Sicko, and like I want to say VVM, and like acts like some really like variety and disparate kinds of like sound collage and appropriation artists. And so like I was really into what we would now call the A+B mashups at that time, but I was also like my own work. I kind of was more along the lines of a VVM or Cassette Boy or something.
Can you
like
explain like something like VVM? And then also, can you explain like DeSico?
DeSico, like he was doing, like especially in the early time, like they called it DSP for digital signal processing. It was at the time it was new type of sound effects where your computer would go, and so he would do like these pop remixes, but they would be like stuttery, and they would have all these kind of like weird, like swishy kind of transformative like sounds like that. So that was some pretty exciting stuff for me at that time. VVM, it was like, if you're familiar with the term irritainment, it's like entertainment, but it's like deliberately kind of obnoxious, right? And so VVM, they would do things like he would come up with these effects, and it would be like the most horrible sounding effect that you could find, and then they would take like some like really shitty pop song and then run it through this effect, and it would just sound just atrocious. And then they put it out and like, here's Help Aphex Twin or whatever. And then like the Krista Berg Lady in Red was an obvious classic example where they take kind of like a schmaltzy song and then they run and then they just make it sound like bad. And it was like, there's a lot more to VVM than that, but a lot of it was like sort of appropriation where they're clearly taking the piss. Yeah.
So at this point, like, again, especially with Mano a Mano and, seeing what's coming up in the bootleg mashup scene, a lot of the juxtaposition that you're seeing in some of this early UK mashup scene specifically is making a lot of political points. It's a lot of criticism of current pop music. And there's a lot of that same angst that's there and anger that's in like industrial or, happy hardcore, stuff like that.
Sure.
So it is this kind of transgressive kind of political statement, but also humor and
right. It's like you take like the pop music, you take the Christina Aguilera, the pop music, and then you would take the really like self-serious band The Strokes, and then you put them together, and it sort of like takes the piss out of both of them, right? And so you have like the angry hard like rock sound, and then like there's like Christina Aguilera's like Genie in a Bottle's on top of it now, but at the same time it's sort of right. You take the nice pop music. It's so yeah, like the juxtaposition, like not only. And like I'm saying, it's it's more than the parts put together. You get this kind of completely different thing, but it definitely it was not. It was kind of like a middle finger at the same time.
It's just a delicious morsel of jab, you know? And so here's the question again. You grew up with MTV. You grew up with all of this stuff. You grew up with the Catholic Church. You grew up. I'm especially seeing as we're talking about the year 2000. George W. Bush just won office, and you're out of college, so you're probably political at that point. And since you were already writing, you were writing in defense of apathy. We already know what side you were probably on the George W. Election. So here we are. You have the ability to have all these samples, whereas before all you had access to were like the files on your computer. But now because of Audio Galaxy and like the advent of sampling and stuff like that, or home products or programs that allow you to sample, you have all of this stuff, and you have the scene that is very specifically taking the piss out of all this other stuff. Your stuff is right. It's like finding a peer group of like-minded individuals across the pond, as they say.
Right.
And, you are already tuned into the email listserv, talking to other, creators, via Snuggles. At what point were you conscious that what you were doing is the fact that you grew up in a culture where generally, media was one way? They were able to speak to you. You weren't able to speak back. And now that, Plunderphonics is here, and now that, you can make these juxtapositions and have instant distribution via the internet and stuff like that, you can actually kind of have a say, where it's like you're actually like having part of a two-way conversation now. It's like taking all this stuff in, chopping it up, rearranging it, and going, here's what I think about that.
Right. You didn't have to be signed. You didn't have to have somebody pay to make your video and get it distributed. You could do it yourself and post it somewhere. And then if you found the right forum, then you could get people to check it out. Yeah. It was definitely a big deal. And it was like part of the wonder of the early internet was this sort of collaboration and making your own sort of DIY networks and
interactivity, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of I was on mailing lists and message boards and all of that. You can actually share your stuff.
What were some other groups that you were on other than Snuggles back in that time?
I was on Snuggles and of course Remori, which was another similar list. For Breakcore, there was a message board called C8. It was a list that was a very early, really big early Breakcore stuff. Was like all of the Dormouse and Venetian Snares, and all these people were on C8 at the time, back when nobody knew who any of them were, and we're all just sharing our hardcore tracks. That was a big one. I had there was a local music message board, IndianapolisMusic.net, and it was in the time, because you could have different forums for all of the different interests, and when you would post on that forum or on that list, then you would know that everybody would at least be shown the title and choose to view it, and as opposed to now where you post something on Facebook and you don't even know who's going to see it, and it's this is something that I would want to post to my friends who are into Breakcore, but I don't know if any of them will see it or if it's going to just show the post to my mom and, people who are more interested in this other thing, where they kind of, you had all these different groups and silos where you could connect with people with similar interests, and now social media all that has been collapsed into the same channel, and so it's harder to get the right people to see your stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Because even if you're friends with them, you don't know if they'll see that specific post or if they'll see something else that you posted or nothing that you posted.
Yeah, and I can't help but feel like that's very much intentional, and as far as like, you know, making sure that people who, because the people who own these platforms nowadays want to be able to give premium access for a cost. You know, you pay Facebook
Right.
for impressions or likes or stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so it's a way of controlling that channel. Whereas like the early internet was somewhat open, like, you know, as long as you paid for a connection, you had access to almost everything. And, you know, as it's gone along,
Yeah.
it's been, you know, squashed, and the people who had control over that one-way conversation back in the day now still retain somewhat, they've regained some of that power. Yeah.
Right.
But here, let's go, because we are we're now at the last half hour of the show.
90 minutes.
So I need to
Yeah.
come through some of these things, because I specifically want to talk about your mashup albums that you did. But before we get there, I want to just briefly touch on, in 2003, you put out a George W. Bush cut up, and
Right.
that
That was,
got you a really surprising mention in what magazine?
it was Playboy magazine. It was because this was the Iraq War invasion, right? And that was a big political moment for those of us who were of age at the time. Like some of us could tell right away that this was like bullshit. Like, hey, why are we going to war with this country when they aren't even the ones who supposedly attacked us, right? And so there was I had a recording of the George Bush's initial speech declaring that we were invading Iraq or whatever. And I cut it up, like, you know, make the political cut up to make it more strident or whatever. And then it was like a 9-minute noise piece with a bunch of junk at the end. So there was like a short cut up and then a bunch of trash. But the title of it was "We Will Iraq You," and I had it cut up so similar to Emergency Broadcast Network here. George Bush was saying, "We will Iraq you," you know, and so on. And so I have no idea how the people at Playboy found out about it. But and then one of my bandmates, Jason Unzine, like I think he emailed me, but maybe he called on the phone and he said, "Hey, my brother has a subscription to Playboy, and he saw your name in the Playboy." And I was like, "What?" So I had to run off to the porn store to grab a couple of copies. And this is the issue. It was the August 2003 issue. You can see that some of the women from Survivor, their clothes got voted off.
Yeah.
And so this is this article, "The Death of Radio Inside the Corporation That Controls the Airwaves." And this was an article about Clear Channel. Does Clear Channel, do they even have that?
I want to say
anymore?
that it's still around. Yeah.
I'm not
Because
sure
they're tied together with
name.
Live Nation
The
now.
company. Yeah, maybe it's Live Nation now. But okay, it says, all right, looking for a clear case of political clout run amok? Look no further than Clear Channel Communications, owner of more than 1,200 radio stations. Blah, blah, blah. After September 11th, Clear Channel circulated a list to its stations of 150 songs that corporate executives deemed too offensive or insensitive for the ears of traumatized Americans. So programmers shelved hits such as Soundgarden's "Blew Up the Outside World," the Gap Band's "You Dropped a Bomb on Me," etc. So there's a long list of songs that you couldn't play. And then at the bottom, there's this little pull box. Songs you probably wouldn't hear on Clear Channel stations.
Yes, and if you look at the screen, you'll see that I added that to your frame that I designed there at the very bottom. The songs you probably won't hear on Clear Channel stations.
And these are all "In a World Gone Mad," Beastie Boys, "A Twisted Sense of God," Chuck D. These are all people that you've heard of. And then over here on REM and Mudhoney, and then I guess I don't know who Mexico's Molotov is, but then over here they said "We Will Iraq You," stAllio, and I'm like, I don't know. I think there was probably it was picked up on some website of protest songs, and they must have seen it there. But yeah, it's hey, you're mentioned in the current Playboy, so you should have it could have happened, and I wouldn't have heard about it.
I don't know. I always feel that because of our there were so many people on Snuggles. There were so many people on Snuggles, and Remori and Detritus. That it wound up. I feel like that it probably wound up getting included because, again, somebody on one of those lists had heard your track through Snuggles and put it on there. Because I know that I wound up getting gigs because I was on Snuggles for what it was. That's why I did H2K2 in New York City. And what was it? Somebody who was on, I want to say it was Ned Raggett, was writing for AllMusic at the time.
Yes.
So it's like there were people who had their fingers everywhere, and I know for a fact that the reason why a lot of stuff showed up on Boom Selection was because of Snuggles, because you weren't the only snuggler that wound up on that. Never mind the Bootlegs Volume 1 CD. Now, we've talked about your Playboy mention, but you also, and just briefly, I just want to touch on this. You decided to do a concept album mixing together sex, cereal, and nudity. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Notice I've creatively covered up the nudity here.
You've censored the tits that are on the cover. All right. So what had happened was this was like we were saying, like there were lots of different mailing lists and forums and so on. One of the ones that I was on was like the local Indianapolis like goth and industrial scene. And so my friend Maura was also on this list, and like one day she just mentioned that she was eating, I believe, Cocoa Puffs in the bath, and then she had to clarify that she was eating them in a bowl and that the bath was not like full of Cocoa Puffs. And then so that joke kind of spun out. It's like, oh, well, Maura's Milk Chocolate Bath would be a great title for like a record. And I was like, okay, I'm game. I'll make the record. And then as like part of the joke along was that we would have to do this like ridiculous cover art where we would have Maura in an actual bowl of cereal. So since that original concept was this joke about like bathing in cereal, and the concepts were bathing, cereal, and then of course like bathing would be really, also you have to get undressed. So like nudity and all that stuff. And so there's like a bunch of like samples about taking off your clothes or taking off your pants. And then there's like there's a bunch of stuff where it's like it might not be obvious why I sampled it, but I got it out of a cereal box. Like at this time you could buy a box of cereal and it would come with like a CD or like a CD-ROM of a computer game. So there was like Chex Quest was a Doom clone that you could get at a box of Chex. And you would play as like a Chex. You would like this guy from Chex Squadron, and you were going to fighting against the Flemoids who were trying to make the cereal soggy or whatever. So I got that in there. There was a bunch of stuff that I got CD out of a cereal box, so that meant I could sample it and put it on the record. So it's kind of a weird concept.
Yeah. And of course, at the same time, or shortly after, like you again, we're still doing stuff with Animals with Animals. You did the Get Me Some Press or Kill These People. You put out your first 12-inch, which was True Data, which was like sonified data files, some of the stuff you were doing in the early 90s, but with more of a rhythm. And you said that it sounded more like an abrasive take on chiptune, is what you initially said about that.
It was because it's coming out of a similar place where there's sort of like a lo-fi, like primitive kind of sounds, but it was like a much more abrasive twist on it. It was, and then like also because I was paying money to put out a record, I'm like, I have to make sure that everything on this is really good.
Right.
As opposed to when I'm putting up MP3s, like who cares if it's good? I'm done.
So I'll say around that same 2004 period, like, Mashups in the UK had finally started to show up a little bit on the US side, like with the Gray album by Danger Mouse had already shown up. And in 2004, in December of 2004, right before 2005, there was a one-time program with a title that made me think that it was going to continue on as like an MTV project called MTV's Ultimate Mashups. And this was stateside, and this is what birthed Jay-Z's Collision course with Linkin Park. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because you definitely talked about that on Snuggles at the time.
I talked about it, but I haven't listened to that in 15 years because it was them kind of like jumping on the train,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm sure it was well done for what it was, but it wasn't like people at home like thinking, what's the most ridiculous or what can I combine these two? They're like, oh, what if we actually put Jay-Z and Linkin Park together in an actual studio and had them do this. So I don't know. It's like fake isn't really the word because it's actually the real artists, but there's a certain level of artifice to it where we got the real artists to do their own mashups of their own stuff. It wasn't the same as like a bunch of people in their bedrooms.
Yeah. When we talk about like, that early movement of like, here's this kind of democratization of like, we can finally have a two-way conversation and it's not, the industry talking directly to us, is now we can talk back. We formed this push of like mashup culture, which was just like, hey, look, now that we have the internet, we're able to, interact with you, and this is what we think of your stuff. And instead of like really listening to it being like, hey, this is a piss take, or this is, criticism of like, what you're doing, it was simultaneously a co-option, at least in my opinion, co-option that made it like seem artificial at its least offensive. But most offensively for me, especially here in the States, was that you're talking about a time 4 years into the 2000s where people were being sued for peer-to-peer file sharing, where mashup artists were not just getting cease and desist, but like literally getting like serious legal threats. And so here's this like in your face of like, look, unless you are as rich as, Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy, you can't afford to sample. You can't afford to have this conversation. You are the peon that is, in this position. So it's for me, it was simultaneously offensive and also like, okay, and was there any offense taken on your side?
I wasn't a big fan of the concept, or it's like we're doing our own thing, and then it's always the capitalism, how do we co-opt the underground and make a buck off of it? Because there weren't a lot of people making money off of mashups or bootlegs unless they were actually going and playing at Booty or whatever,
Yeah, I know a lot of.
Even then, I'm sure they weren't making a lot of money and like going and playing at like the clubs in 2002 in London, but.
Well, in the UK scene, there were quite a number of top producers, at least, that wound up spinning that off into careers with like making actual mixes for David Bowie and like working with a Beatle or.
Right, but then like Richard X like stopped making mashups. It's like he's like, I'm doing this, I'm making mashups, and then I'm going to become a real producer and stop.
I'm a real producer.
Right, like Danger Mouse like broke through with the Grey album, and then he never did anything else in that vein ever again.
But at what point is that just the confines of the industry is the question? Like, is it that they really wanted to do the push of I'm going to become a real producer? Or was it just the fact of like, look, they're still tied to, they have to clear all these samples, even if it's in their library, and they're not allowed to do it?
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
it's like it's very difficult to legally do. Like you would need $1 million budget to be able to clear the samples on my releases, you know.
Now, when we talk, and I want to talk just briefly about this because it needs to bridge what we've talked about as far as like the intentions of the movement and like the interactivity and like the political climate and all this other stuff. When we talk more about like breakcore, and we talk about someone like Stunt Rock, and specifically like Stunt Rock. I talked to John Nelson on a previous episode of Masters of MASH about his interactions with, Stunt Rock, filling out his Q&A form very sarcastically, very like self-deprecating, kind of whatever else like that. These kind of attitudes, like, God, I forgot where I was going. Can you speak to why like that exists? That kind of like mentality exists within that. Is it a humorous thing? Is it sincere? Like, what's the?
No, the Stunt Rock, it was definitely a humorous shtick. Like his song title, he would have very long song titles that are self-deprecating, and it was all like sort of an aesthetic and a like, you're in on the joke that like he talks about how terrible he is and how much he wanted to die or whatever. It was an act, a lot of it. I mean, I'm sure there's certainly truth to like, you don't like make up these jokes if you aren't actually depressed on some level, right?
Well, I saw for some reason it's like I saw that especially his song title choices and stuff like that. And if for anybody who's familiar with the grindcore scene, and pardon me for saying this, but there's a band called Anal Cunt that is they thrived on trying to be as offensive as they possibly could. And all of their song titles are kind of in the same kind of vein of this, like.
Well, especially if you're talking about like metal, or like these are like extreme forms of music that are very like musically intense and extreme, and so it's natural that the content, like the subject matter, might be similarly extreme, right? If you're making like really loud, intense music, then it's only natural that you might like really offensive or really over the top titles and sample choices at the same time.
And it's funny because it's like, looking back, if you go to Stunt Rock's page now for Bandcamp, he actually has some descriptions of some of the albums where he turns around and says it's basically an apology. He's like, I apologize to any parents or anybody who thought that, it was just me trying to be like in your face, aggressive, whatever. He's like, but really it was me covering up for insecurity and like really needing attention at the time. So I found that interesting that, again, as people grow up, they feel like they have to apologize for this artistic choice that they made back then.
Right.
But that being said, when we talk about like that early mashup scene and, it all about the resentments of being like forced into, absorbing all this mainstream culture without the ability to like speak back to, record execs or, your TV set, other than just speaking to your TV set. Now you have the industry basically coming back and reselling you your anger, but in a commercialized format. And at that point, like, a lot of the mashup producers that I've talked to from this earlier movement, and some of the people I hope to talk to in some of their interviews, talk about like, the moment the mashups were born, they were dead, that they immediately died because people started to try to make them seriously, that people tried to like, oh no, I'm really going to do this, as opposed to, haha, this is this aggressive joke, or this culture jamming, if you will, kind of speak back. Now, that being said, around 2004 or 2005 is when Gaibo was, really having some troubles with like, cease and desist and stuff like that, and they wanted moving away, and people started wondering about like the faltering of the movement. Now, around 2008, you decided that, not you two, the band, but you yourself were kind of fed up with the A-B nature of that. Tell me what inspired your first mashup album.
So like I said, like in the beginning of the movement, it seemed like more diverse. Like they had a lot of the A+B stuff, but then there was Cassette Boy and Ozamizo and more collage based artists and stuff. And then like by the late 2000s, like some of the original pioneers had pretty much stopped. Freelance Hellraiser wasn't doing stuff anymore and all that stuff. And so the people who were still making stuff and calling them mashups and putting them out, they were like definitely the A+B format, and it just kind of like, it just wasn't that exciting anymore, the formula, where you take an instrumental and you put a vocal on top of it, and I'm like, this is the same thing that people have been doing for 6-8 years now, and it's just kind of boring, right? And we can, like, there's so many different ways that you could go with it. And so like also in my own work, like I had been sampling tons of pop music and rock music and stuff, but most of the sampling, it was all like making jokes about like the lyrical content. So I would take the song and I would sample something based on what the vocals were saying, and then I would either cut up that vocal, or I would like take loops based on what the vocals were and stuff. And I was like, I want to move on to more musical based sampling, where it's not necessarily about what the vocalist is saying. And so I had these ideas to do more, music-based cut-ups and more like rhythmic-based cut-ups. And that was where some of the ideas came for that. And I was like, well, why do this? And this is like introduced some new ideas into this kind of mashup scene. And it's not really sound collage. I mean, it's collage, but it's like supposed to be musical and like coming from a pop background. So I kind of saw it in a similar vein. And so, it was like, let's introduce some new ideas, some new kind of composition techniques into the scene. And so I called my first EP like Mash Smarter Not Harder, and it was always like, it was set up as like a series of lessons, kind of the Steinsky lessons, and it was like this first EP was supposed to be like a very basic kindergarten level intro, like here are some very basic ideas, and then the plan was always I'm going to have this, and then like my next one will be more cut up, and then so on. And so like for one thing, so I deliberately avoided doing any kind of overlapping, right? Because I'm like, the point is like, hey, there's other kinds of things that you can do than put a vocal on top of an instrumental, and so I deliberately had no overlap, and I'm like, there's some other stuff that you can do here. So that was the Mash Smarter Not Harder EP. And I was like so like hyped about like this new direction and these new ideas, and I got to rush this EP out. And then it kind of fell flat. Like some people got it right away, but other people, they didn't get it at all, or it was too abrasive. I remember someone on Gaibo said that I hadn't done anything that Ozamizo hadn't done with intro inspection. And I was like, huh, okay. Obviously, and or the other thing that happened is like some people would kind of see where I was going, and then they would get frustrated that I hadn't already gotten there. Like they would see like the potential and the ideas that I was doing, and they're like, yeah, this is good, but I want you to get more cut up and more and this. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's where I'm going. I just haven't gotten there
yet. My favorite quote was from the world famous audio hacker who had said that he, in an email correspondence with you, had said, I'm toying around with something taking direct inspiration from what you've done here, in fact. Although I must admit, I was already lightly tinkering with something similar thanks to a recent work by O, Astro, and Realistic. He's like, but you definitely took it to a more interesting level. So on that first one. So the Mash Smarter Not Harder was the part one of a kind of an academic step of like proof of concept. Here is an action, and here's the polished version between the three different EPs.
Right.
That first EP, I just wanted to say real quick before we move on to a huge smash. I loved what you'd put in the press release because it was such a bold statement to like get people's attention. You said, Mash Smarter Not Harder isn't just an EP, it's an audio manifesto, a roadmap to a mashed up future. Mm-hmm. The goal of this EP isn't just to generate downloads or make you shake your ass, but to spawn a new golden age of mashups. So you really were trying to like say, hey guys, let's stop with these ABs. Let's really start to like work on different stuff. Now, looking back, like I can definitely see where Earworm like started doing like the year-end mashes and stuff, and really popularized with the new generation of mashup producers the whole like mash medley kind of thing, where it's like we're gonna put all these pop artists from this, either this year or at least old pop artists, and just do like vocal over like maybe one or also a chop up of instrumentals. So it's still AB, but more chopped up. But what you were doing was very much like de minimis, like really just trying to focus on explicit parts of songs juxtaposed with one another. On that mash, on the huge smash, what was it that you did different?
It was more just like the samples got shorter and I got more intricate with the arrangements.
But you still kept not overlapping stuff, right? You still wanted to keep them separate?
There's maybe like, I think there's like one song on there with some overlapping moments. Yeah. But for the most part, it was still about like hard cuts. But it was like, on the first one, there would be like a sample that would last for like a whole measure or on the future sound of retro, I'm like, here is 2 bars of one song and then 2 bars of the next song. And then it goes back to another 2 bars of the first song. And 2 of that, and it was like long samples cutting back and forth. And then for a huge smash, I would allow myself to get more and more granular, and they're more cut up and rearranged.
And so again, we're talking 2008, 2010 for a huge smash. In 2016, you came out with Fixed That For You, where you started to overlap channels and adding bass lines, right?
It was like overlapping and then cutting things up to like make different melodies or whatever. But a lot of it was like I said, I deliberately avoided doing any overlap in the early stuff. And then I'm like, all right, I'm far enough along. I've demonstrated we can do all this other stuff without overlap. So I'll now allow myself to start overlapping again and putting different beats and vocals on top of each other.
We don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to play a little bit of one of your tracks off of that 2016 Fix That For You, put together by another snuggler named James Allensbach. I hope I got that last name right, but we knew him as Jima. Again, this is from the album Fix That For You. Here's just a small bit of that. All right, that was "People Like Damn" by again. That was a stAllio project, right? Correct? Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Off of the album "Fix That for You" from 2016. Uh, some really amazing work there, and again, it's like it goes back to kind of like blip hop for me, or glitch hop,
Hmm.
which. I know we only have a
Yeah.
few more minutes, but there's so much about you that I want to share with everybody, specifically the stuff that you are a glitch and data bending artist who has spent a
Hmm.
significant portion of the last 15 or so years, if not your entire career, basically taking data and bending it, especially visual stuff. You've done the Bill
Hmm.
Miller's Plain Text Pavilion. You made this text glitch generator online, so you're a bit of a programmer yourself.
Hmm. A little bit. I ran like I was on Tumblr. I did a blog called Glitch GIFs to focus on glitch art and GIFs, and yeah, I did. Like I was saying, like I wrote tutorials, and so my tutorials were very early glitch tutorials that were fairly
And you've
influential.
spun your art
They
into a
got me.
series of products. You can buy, was it glitch pillows for your home? I've got some right here in the front, and then glitch
Hmm.
face masks on the corners,
Pillows, face
as
masks,
well as
shirts.
a. I really appreciate that you made the Mr. Yuck face mask, because that was an early bad taste kind of like appropriated logo. Was the Mr. Yuck
Right.
face? If people don't understand, that was like a poison symbol back in the day. It was like a smiley face, but it was a yuck.
If your kids are too young to read, they can recognize this like disgusted
Right,
face,
right.
and they know not to drink
Now,
bleach.
again, we have to
Nowadays,
talk
it's
about
drinking
like
bleach.
Animals with Animals put out a ton of work that continues on to this day. You guys put out an album just in 2019 called "We Fail for a
Last year.
Living." What was it? A track off of that. I was going to play, but unfortunately, I don't have enough time. But also, you in 2016, you started doing a yearly vaporwave-esque thing called Santa Cloud every Christmas, called Christmas Spirits Volumes
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3, and even came out with your own single
Hmm.
last year that is kind of like the normal meets. God, I don't even know how to explain it. It's fucking fantastic, is what it is. It's called Santa Hit a Satellite. And if you're into Christmas music, you need to go check out Santa Hit a Satellite. Thankfully, I've got remix parts to that. So at some point, I'm going to get around to remixing that and put that out. I don't know if I'll mash it, but I might. I also wanted to say very specifically that Animals with Animals in 2011, because this is tangential to current mashup culture. In 2011, you guys put out a Randy Macho Man Savage tribute album or EP.
Hmm.
What
Right.
was it called?
It was called
Oh, it was just called
Macho,
Macho.
and it was just called Macho. Like a lot of like I said, it's kind of a collective of whoever happens to want to be in the group at that time. So like a bunch of I was never a huge wrestling fan, but several of my bandmates were, and Macho Man was always particularly dear to all of us. I mean, he was dear to me even just from Slim Jim commercials and being such a larger than life person. And so when he passed, everyone was like, we need to do a Macho Man tribute record. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. It was an EP in part because if you're doing something like that, it has to be timely. You can't wait a
Yeah.
year to put out like your Macho Man tribute record. It has to like come out within like a few weeks, or a month of him passing, or else it's not timely. So that was partly why it was so short. I'm like, well, we gotta get this done. So let's just get it out there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's pretty amazing stuff, and
it was
again,
it was
like it's so
fun.
adjacent now with DJ Cummerbund, doing most of his mashes at least include one reference to Randy Macho Man Savage. So it's great to have that tie-in. We gotta go, unfortunately, but I'm gonna leave you guys. Leave everybody with was it stAllio's most recent track? Can you tell me just a little bit about OK Google before going into the video?
Um, let's see. So really, the idea is, okay, Google is like the phrase that you would say to use your speech to text to communicate with Google. So if you wanted to use your voice to do a Google search, then you would say, okay, Google, tell me about rutabagas or whatever. And so partly the idea was like when you're making like a dance track, you really want to try to capture like the zeitgeist. What you're really doing is you want to kind of sum up your times or something about the era in which you're living. It's like a catchphrase or something that. And so, okay, Google is kind of like this kind of catchphrase that everybody would say. So in that sense, you kind of make a dance track called Okay Google, but then there's sort of the twist of like the reason why people say it and the context in which people say Okay Google is like kind of a twist on it. So like you have a dance track about Okay Google, but it's also like the song, theoretically the song with the lyrics Okay Google, it could actually trigger your phone to wake up, And so when I say Hey Siri in the song, like maybe Siri will actually wake up and try to answer you or something. So that was kind of the angle on that. But it was like if you're doing a joke, like a joke song like that, it was really important to me that it had to be like good. It had to be kind of like a catchy song that people would actually want to listen to, regardless of whether the joke landed or whether it actually would trigger the device. Because if like something that bugs me is when you like put out like something with like a great concept and a title, and then the actual song is not like interesting. I'm like, I wanted to make a song that people would actually want to hear and listen to, but also at the same time, there's that sort of like joke aspect where maybe your phone will wake up in your pocket or something.
Yeah, your production on this is stellar.
So
like the rhythms almost come off as kind of like Chicago juke, like beats. What did you program all this? Is this loops? What was that?
I programmed all of the drum parts on my phone.
On your phone? On your phone.
This is a program on my phone. It's called G Stomper Studio. It is a $15 Android app, and the reason it's $15 is because this one has like the drum machine and it has like a built-in synth.
Holy crap!
Like so it's like the whole suite of drum machine synths and all this stuff for $15 on Android, and it's like a really powerful like step drum machine. Like I can do like 20 years ago, I bought like an MC303 groove box off a friend for like $200, and I can do probably more on my phone with a $15 app. I can do probably better drum programming than I would have been able to do with gear that I bought used $200.
Yeah, because that was the year 2000. Like, you put out the Fazuk, which was your MC303 Groovebox SP202 sampler album.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can do better drum programming on my phone.
Welcome to the future. And again, this is what we talk about when we talk about like the confluence of like technology and like access to media and stuff like that.
It's so great to have it on my phone because I can, like, if I'm sitting in my car waiting for something, I can just whip it out and work on patterns. Or if I'm in the bathroom, I can work on patterns for 5 or 10 minutes and then just put it down and then come back later. And so it's nice, like inspiration comes in bursts. And so I get this one idea out and then it's done and I can just move on. It's really great having it.
Well, that being said, again, thank you for being our guest. Your output has always been an inspiration and is really great. I really hope you keep creating because you haven't stopped yet. You're putting out multiple releases every year, and still working. Thank you for that. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching Masters of Mash. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over. We will be raiding into Mashup Listening Hour with Adriana A. over at the Voodoo Mashup channel. But I'm going to leave you with this. This is from March 31st of this year, stAllio's track, Okay Google.
Okay Google. Hey Google. Hey Siri. Okay. Hey Google. Hey Alexa. Okay Google. Hey Google. Hey Siri. Okay. Hey Google. Hey Alexa. Okay Google. Hey Google. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Okay. Hey Google. Hey Alexa. Hey Alexa. Okay Google. Hey Google. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Okay. Hey Google. Hey Alexa. Hey Alexa. Okay Google.
Hey Siri. Hey Alexa. Hey Siri. Hey Google. Hey Siri. Hey Alexa. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Alexa. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Alexa. Hey Siri.
Okay Google. Okay Google. Okay Google. Okay Google.
Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Google, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, 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 hey Google, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri.
Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Siri, okay. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Alexa, okay. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Siri, okay. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Alexa, okay. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Siri, okay. Hey Siri, Google. Hey Alexa, okay, Google. Hey Siri, okay. Hey Alexa, okay. Google. Hey Siri, okay. Hey Alexa, okay. Google.
Hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Google, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, 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 hey Google, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Siri.
Okay, Google.
Okay, Google.